The champagne glass shattered before Trevor could set it down. Genevieve watched her ex-husband's face drain of all color as four toddlers tumbled out of the white Lamborghini behind her, their laughter echoing across the manicured lawn of the Riverside Country Club. His pregnant wife, Candace, gripped his arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You actually came," Trevor whispered, the words barely audible over the sudden silence that had fallen across the backyard baby shower. 60 guests stood frozen, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they stared at the woman Trevor had spent 2 years telling everyone was broken, bitter, and barren. Genevieve smiled, the kind of smile that held secrets and promises of destruction. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" The silk of her designer dress whispered against her skin as she moved forward, her heels clicking against the stone pathway. Behind her, Emma, James, Sophie, and Theodore, 18 months old and absolutely perfect, toddled toward the elaborate swing set that Trevor had probably installed for Candace's ready-made family. "If you're here because you believe karma doesn't just knock," she kicks down the door, "hit that subscribe button for the Formidable Revenge channel and I love you, because what you're about to hear is the most savage comeback story of the year. Drop a like if you've ever been thrown away by someone who didn't deserve you in the first place. And comment below, have you ever gotten the last word with someone who underestimated you?" Trevor's mother, Patricia, was the first to break the silence. "Genevieve? Dear God, whose children are those?" "Mine," Genevieve replied, her voice steady and clear. "Emma, James, Sophie, and Theodore Kingsley. They have their father's name, my husband's name." The word husband landed like a bomb. Candace's face went pale. "But Trevor said, he said you couldn't have children?" Genevieve finished for her, watching Trevor's carefully constructed world begin to crack. "That's interesting, because as you can see, I had no trouble having children once I was with the right man." Trevor's brother Nathan was already doing the math in his head. "Those kids look about 18 months old. That means you got pregnant?" "6 months after our divorce was finalized," Genevieve confirmed. "Apparently, Trevor was misinformed about my fertility issues." A murmur rippled through the crowd. 60 people who had believed Trevor's version of their story, the tale of the obsessive wife who'd driven away a good man with her desperate need for children, were suddenly looking at living, breathing proof that nothing Trevor had told them was true. Trevor found his voice, though it shook. "Genevieve, this isn't the time. Isn't it?" She pulled out her phone, her movements deliberately slow. "Because you invited me here specifically to show everyone how pathetic your ex-wife had become. You wanted them to see the broken, childless woman you'd escaped from. So let's show them exactly who we both really are." Trevor's face shifted from shock to pure panic as he realized what she was holding, medical records he'd thought were buried forever. The entertainment portion of his baby shower was about to begin. But the show wasn't going to be what Trevor had scripted. 3 years earlier, Genevieve had been a different woman entirely. She'd been Genevieve Morrison then, 27 years old and convinced she'd married her soulmate. Trevor Morrison worked in corporate finance, drove a sensible sedan, and talked endlessly about the big family they'd build together. For the first 2 years of marriage, she'd believed every word. The breaking had started slowly, like poison seeping into water. Month 6 of trying to conceive, Trevor bought the first ovulation kit. "Just to help us optimize our chances," he'd said, kissing her forehead. But his eyes had already started carrying that edge of impatience whenever she got her period. By year 2, their bedroom had become a laboratory. Trevor tracked everything: her temperature, her cycle, her stress levels. When she cried from the hormone injections that made her sick, he'd snap about emotional instability preventing conception. He started working late, coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. "You need to try harder," he'd said one night, standing in their bedroom doorway while she prepared another injection. The disgust in his voice was barely concealed. "Maybe if you weren't so stressed about this, your body would actually work." Her body. Always her body that was failing. Never his. The fertility clinic appointments had become a special kind of hell. Dr. Patterson would review her results. Always normal, always healthy, while Trevor sat beside her, his jaw tight with frustration. There has to be something wrong, he'd insist. Keep testing her, as if she were a machine with a defective part that needed identifying. Trevor's family had joined the chorus. His mother made pointed comments about still waiting for grandchildren during Sunday dinners. His brother asked when they were going to figure out the baby situation. Everyone looked at Genevieve like she was the problem that needed solving. The worst part had been watching Trevor with other people's children. He'd post photos on social media with his nieces and nephews, captions reading, "Can't wait for my own." His smile in those pictures was genuine, full of warmth he no longer showed his wife. 3 years into their marriage, Genevieve had stopped recognizing herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was hollow-eyed, defeated, convinced she was fundamentally broken. She'd built her entire identity around becoming Trevor's perfect wife, giving him the family he wanted. She'd believed she was the one failing at the only job that mattered. When Trevor asked for a separation that November night, Genevieve had dropped the hormone syringe, watching it roll across their bedroom floor as her world collapsed. "I need space," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "This marriage isn't working anymore." "Because I can't get pregnant?" She'd been kneeling on the floor, looking up at him, begging with her eyes for him to say it wasn't true. "Because you've made pregnancy the only thing that matters. Because you're obsessed. Because I can't breathe in this marriage anymore." But his words had been lies wrapped in cruelty. What he'd really meant was, "Because you're not worth the effort. Because I've found someone better. Because I want out, and I need you to believe it's your fault." He'd moved out 3 days later, taking everything but her sense of worth. The phone call came 6 weeks into their separation. Genevieve was living alone in what had been their house, eating frozen meals and sleeping in the guest room because their bed smelled like Trevor's cologne. When her phone rang with his number, hope had surged through her chest. "Hey," Trevor's voice had been careful, measured. "I wanted to tell you something before you heard it from someone else." Her hands had started shaking before he even said the words. "I've been seeing someone. Her name is Candace. She works at my firm." The world had tilted. Genevieve had grabbed the kitchen counter to keep from falling. "How long? Does it matter?" "How long?" A pause. "A few weeks before I moved out." Before? He'd been building his exit while she'd been injecting herself with hormones, undergoing procedures, blaming herself for their failing marriage. He'd been planning his escape to another woman while watching Genevieve destroy herself trying to save what he'd already decided to abandon. "Candace has 2 kids from her previous marriage," Trevor had continued, his voice almost defensive. "I know how this sounds, but meeting her made me realize what I was missing, what we've been missing." The cruelty was surgical. Trevor hadn't wanted to go through the work of having children with Genevieve, but he'd happily accepted a ready-made family with Candace. He hadn't wanted to fix their fertility problems. He'd wanted someone whose fertility had never been a question. "So you get to be a dad after all," Genevieve had whispered. "It's not about that." But it was exactly about that. Trevor got the instant family without the effort, without the commitment, without having to watch Genevieve suffer through one more failed procedure. He got to play father to someone else's children, while Genevieve was left believing her body had ruined everything. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later. They'd been 37 pages of legal language that essentially said Trevor wanted everything and she deserved nothing. The house was his, purchased before marriage. The savings account was his. Mostly his contributions anyway. Even the car was technically his since it was in his name for better financing rates. Her lawyer, Patricia Reynolds, had been blunt during their first meeting. "Since you were only married 3 years and most assets were premarital, you're looking at maybe $12,000 and 60 days to vacate the house." Genevieve had sat in that sterile office, realizing 8 years with Trevor had left her with nothing except debt from pointless fertility treatments. But Trevor's cruelty hadn't stopped at financial devastation. The lies he'd told his family were masterful in their calculated malice. When Genevieve ran into his mother at the grocery store 2 weeks after the papers arrived, Patricia Morrison had hugged her with forced sympathy. "Genevieve, dear, Trevor told us about your decision to divorce. We're all so sorry you couldn't handle the fertility struggles anymore." The groceries had nearly fallen from Genevieve's hands. "My decision?" "He said you decided you needed a fresh start with someone who didn't remind you of your fertility problems. That you'd moved out because you couldn't bear being in the house where you'd tried so hard to get pregnant." Trevor had rewritten their entire history. In his version, Genevieve was the one who'd given up, who'd run away, who'd broken their marriage apart. He'd painted himself as the concerned husband dealing with an unstable wife who'd abandoned their vows. The narrative was flawless. Trevor became the victim, the long-suffering husband who'd tried everything to support his mentally fragile wife through her breakdown. Genevieve became the obsessive, unstable woman who'd let bitterness destroy a good marriage, and everyone believed him. The final insult arrived on an expensive cardstock envelope 3 months after their divorce was finalized. "You're invited to celebrate the upcoming arrival of baby Morrison. Join Trevor and Candace as they prepare to welcome their little miracle." Genevieve had stared at that invitation for a full minute, waiting for the pain to hit. But instead of hurt, she'd felt something else entirely: white-hot rage crystallizing into clarity. Trevor had called the next day, his voice artificially gentle. "I wanted to give you a heads up that Candace is pregnant." "Congratulations," Genevieve had managed through clenched teeth. "We're having a baby shower next month. Candace thought it would be good to invite you. Show everyone there's no hard feelings." No hard feelings. The man who'd destroyed her life, stolen her home, and rewritten their history wanted her to attend his baby shower like some magnanimous gesture of healing. "Why would you want me there, Trevor?" "Because I think it would be good for you. Show everyone you're moving on, that you're not bitter about how things ended. My family's been asking about you, and I'd like them to see you're okay." But Genevieve knew better now. She'd learned to hear the poison beneath his words. Trevor didn't want her there to prove she was okay. He wanted her there to prove he'd been right to leave her. That night, Genevieve had driven past Trevor's brother's house where he'd supposedly been staying. Through the windows, she'd seen Trevor playing with Candace's 2 children while Candace cooked dinner. They looked like a magazine ad for suburban happiness. She'd been about to leave when voices from the backyard caught her attention. "I still can't believe you actually invited her," Candace was saying, laughing. "Your ex-wife at our baby shower?" "It's brilliant," Trevor had replied, and Genevieve had frozen in her car at the satisfaction in his voice. "My mom's been asking too many questions about why the marriage really ended. Having Genevieve show up looking pathetic will answer all those questions without me saying a word." "What if she doesn't come?" "Oh, she'll come. Genevieve's too desperate not to. She's probably been sitting in that empty house for months, desperate for any excuse to be around me again." Candace had laughed, the sound carrying clearly across the quiet street. "You're terrible. I'm strategic. Everyone will see exactly what I had to deal with. This bitter, childless woman who couldn't handle that I moved on. When she has her inevitable breakdown at our baby shower, it'll justify everything I've told them about why our marriage failed." Genevieve had sat in her car, letting Trevor's plan sink in. He hadn't invited her for closure. He'd invited her to humiliate her publicly, to use her pain as entertainment for his friends and family. He wanted to parade her around like a cautionary tale. This is what happens to women who aren't good enough. She'd driven home that night, finally understanding that Trevor Morrison wasn't just indifferent to her suffering. He was orchestrating it. He was actively enjoying the destruction of the woman who'd once loved him. But Trevor had made one fatal mistake. He'd assumed Genevieve would stay broken. The phone call from Dr. Patterson at the fertility clinic came the next morning. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to follow up on your recent test results." Genevieve's heart had stopped. "I haven't been to your clinic in 6 months. According to our records, you had comprehensive testing done 4 weeks ago. The results show excellent ovarian reserve, perfect hormone levels, and absolutely no fertility issues whatsoever. Based on these results, you should have no trouble conceiving naturally. The floor had disappeared beneath her feet. That's impossible. I've been trying for 3 years. Mrs. Morrison, your fertility markers are exceptional for your age. In fact, I'm surprised you haven't already conceived. Doctor, I didn't authorize any testing. A pause. The tests were ordered by your husband, Trevor Morrison. He said you were too emotional about the results to call yourself, so he wanted to handle the follow-up. Trevor had secretly tested her fertility without her knowledge, discovered she'd never had any problems, and hidden the results while filing for divorce. Genevieve had asked Dr. Patterson to send copies of everything: the test results Trevor had ordered, the medical records he'd accessed, all the documentation of his deception. Then she'd called back with one more question. Doctor, what would prevent conception in someone with my fertility levels? Poor timing, male factor infertility, or deliberate interference with the conception process. What kind of deliberate interference? Birth control without the partner's knowledge, sabotaging fertility timing, providing incorrect information about ovulation cycles. Unfortunately, I've seen cases where one partner secretly prevents conception while the other partner believes they're trying. Trevor had been sabotaging her attempts to conceive while convincing her she was broken. For 3 years, she'd injected herself with hormones, undergone painful procedures, and blamed her body for failing. All while Trevor had been deliberately mistiming everything, managing her cycle tracking, interpreting her ovulation tests wrong. He'd turned their bedroom into a fertility lab not to help her get pregnant, but to prevent it while maintaining the illusion they were trying. When he'd gotten tired of the charade, he'd secretly confirmed she was perfectly fertile, then used their infertility struggles as justification for leaving her. The psychological abuse was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Genevieve had called her sister Victoria immediately. Vic, I need to tell you something, and it's going to sound insane. She'd explained everything: the hidden test results, Trevor's sabotage, his plan to humiliate her at the baby shower. Victoria had been silent for a long moment. Genevieve, that's not just cruel, that's systematic psychological torture. He made me believe I was defective for 3 years. And now he wants to parade you around as proof of his good judgment in leaving you. What are you going to do? Genevieve had looked at that baby shower invitation again, but this time she wasn't seeing it as a victim. She was seeing it as an opportunity. I'm going to destroy him. How? By becoming everything he told me I could never be. The next morning, Genevieve had packed a single suitcase and driven to California where Victoria lived. She'd enrolled in business school, using her small divorce settlement as a down payment on her future. While Trevor played house with Candace, Genevieve learned about entrepreneurship, investment, building wealth. She'd also started therapy to undo the damage Trevor had inflicted. Dr. Sarah Chen had helped her understand gaslighting, emotional abuse, and how abusers systematically destroy their victims' sense of reality. Everything Trevor told you about yourself was a lie, Dr. Chen had said during one session. You're not obsessive, you're dedicated, you're not unstable, you're passionate, you're not broken, you're betrayed. 6 months into her new life, Genevieve had met Alexander Kingsley at a business conference in San Francisco. Alexander owned a venture capital firm and had built 3 successful startups by 36. When she'd told him about Trevor, Alexander had been horrified. Genevieve, Trevor didn't leave you because you couldn't have children. He left you because he was terrified of who you might become if you stopped believing his lies. They'd launched a consulting firm together, helping women rebuild their lives after divorce or major transitions. The company had been immediately successful because they solved a real problem, helping women discover their worth after being torn down by people who'd underestimated them. ACT 6. The miracle falling in love with Alexander had been nothing like her relationship with Trevor. Alexander saw her as a complete person, not a fertility vessel. When they'd decided to start a family, Genevieve had been terrified. What if Dr. Patterson had been wrong? What if there really was something defective about her? She'd gotten pregnant their second month of trying. "See?" Alexander had said, kissing her tears away when the test came back positive. "Your body was never the problem. The problem was trying to build something beautiful with someone who didn't deserve you." The ultrasound at 8 weeks had shown twins. The ultrasound at 12 weeks had revealed they were actually having quadruplets. 4 babies, Alexander had whispered, staring at the monitor in awe. "Our little team." "Are you sure you can handle 4 babies at once?" Genevieve had asked, half laughing, half crying. "Genevieve, I can handle anything with you. You're the strongest woman I know." Alexander had watched her build a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. He'd seen her heal from years of psychological abuse. He'd witnessed her discover her own worth and refuse to settle for less than she deserved. To him, she wasn't a woman who'd failed at her first marriage. She was a woman who'd survived emotional torture and emerged stronger. When Emma, James, Sophie, and Theodore were born, 2 boys and 2 girls, all healthy and perfect, Alexander had cried. "I want them to have my last name," he'd said. "I want the world to know how proud I am to be their father and your husband." The Kingsley family was built on mutual respect, genuine love, and shared dreams. Everything Genevieve's first marriage had lacked. She was adjusting to motherhood when Trevor's second baby shower invitation arrived, forwarded from her old address to her new home in the San Francisco suburbs. Alexander had read over her shoulder. "He still thinks you're the pathetic ex-wife who never got over him." Genevieve had studied the invitation, thinking about who she'd been when Trevor left her versus who she'd become. That broken woman had believed she was worthless without a husband, defective without children, destined to live as a cautionary tale. But the woman she'd become had built a successful business, married a man who worshipped her, and given birth to 4 beautiful children who would grow up knowing their mother was powerful. "I think I'm going to go," she'd said quietly. Alexander had grinned. "Should I be worried about what you're planning?" "Trevor spent 3 years making me believe I was broken. He used my supposed fertility problems to justify destroying my life. He planned to parade me around like some tragic figure. Now I'm going to show him exactly what he lost when he decided I wasn't worth fighting for." Hit that like button if you believe the best revenge is succeeding beyond your enemy's wildest imagination. And subscribe to the Formidable Revenge channel because we're about to get to the moment Trevor's world falls apart. Trevor's baby shower was at the same country club where they'd celebrated their anniversary 4 years ago. As Genevieve had pulled into the parking lot in her white Lamborghini, a gift from Alexander when their company hit its first million, she'd checked her reflection in the mirror. Designer dress, professional makeup, confidence radiating from every pore. She looked like success, happiness, and everything Trevor had convinced her she could never achieve without him. But the real surprise was in the back seat. 4 toddlers in matching outfits, ready to meet their mother's ex-husband. Now, standing in the country club with 60 stunned guests staring at her 4 children, Genevieve watched Trevor's carefully constructed lies crumble in real time. "I don't understand," Patricia Morrison said, looking between her son and Genevieve. "Trevor, you said Genevieve had severe fertility problems. You said that's why your marriage ended." "It's complicated, Mom," Trevor managed, his voice weak. "Actually, it's not complicated at all." Genevieve pulled up her medical records on her phone. "Dr. Patterson from the fertility clinic helped me understand exactly what happened during my marriage." She looked around at all the faces that had believed Trevor's version of their story. His family, their former mutual friends, his co-workers who'd watched him find happiness with Candace after escaping his unstable ex-wife. 3 weeks before Trevor filed for divorce, he secretly ordered comprehensive fertility testing for me. The results showed I have exceptional fertility, better than average for my age. The doctor said I should have had no trouble conceiving naturally. A murmur ran through the crowd. "But Trevor never told me about those results," Genevieve continued, her voice steady. "Instead, He used our fertility struggles as justification for ending our marriage, telling everyone I was obsessed and unstable. He let me believe for 3 years that my body was broken. Candace's face had gone pale. Trevor, you told me Genevieve blamed you for her fertility problems. You said she became mentally unstable because she couldn't get pregnant. Jennifer, let me explain. It's Candace, his wife said quietly, and something in her tone suggested she was beginning to see the pattern of Trevor's lies. Genevieve turned to address the crowd directly. Trevor told you all that our marriage ended because I was obsessed with having children. But Trevor knew I could have children easily. He'd seen my test results. She pulled up another document on her phone. Trevor also told you I became bitter and left him. But the truth is, Trevor filed for divorce after starting a relationship with Candace while we were still married. He asked for a separation, moved in with his brother, and began dating Candace while telling me he needed space to think about our marriage. Nathan Morrison stepped forward, his face dark with anger. Trevor, you told us Genevieve had abandoned you. You said she'd moved out first. I never left Trevor, Genevieve said quietly. I lived in our house alone for months, waiting for him to come home while he was playing family with Candace and her children. Trevor told you I was mentally unstable because it was easier than admitting he'd been cheating. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. People were beginning to understand the scope of Trevor's deception. But here's the part Trevor really doesn't want you to know, Genevieve continued, her voice growing stronger. Dr. Patterson also explained to me what could prevent someone with excellent fertility from conceiving. Poor timing, male factor infertility, or... She paused, letting the tension build. Deliberate interference with the conception process. Trevor's face went white as paper. For 3 years, Trevor controlled all our fertility tracking. He bought the ovulation kits, interpreted the results, scheduled our attempts to conceive. I trusted him to time everything correctly. But what I didn't know was that Trevor was deliberately mistiming everything. He was sabotaging our attempts to get pregnant while making me believe my body was failing. The gasps from the crowd were audible now. Patricia Morrison looked at her son with horror and betrayal. Trevor, tell me this isn't true. Mom, it's not. She's twisting everything. Am I? Genevieve held up her phone. Because I have 3 years of medical records showing I underwent unnecessary procedures, took hormones that made me sick, and blamed myself for fertility problems that never existed. All while Trevor knew exactly what he was doing. Candace had stepped away from Trevor, her hand protectively on her pregnant stomach. You told me Genevieve was the one with fertility problems. You said she blamed you and became obsessive. But Trevor, look at her. She gestured at Genevieve and the 4 children. Does she look like someone who couldn't have children? This is all out of context, Trevor said desperately. Genevieve's remembering things wrong because of her emotional state. My emotional state? Genevieve laughed, but there was no humor in it. Trevor, I'm a co-founder of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm. I'm married to Alexander Kingsley, one of the most successful venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. I'm the mother of 4 healthy children. What exactly about my emotional state seems unstable to you? Alexander chose that moment to walk in from parking the car. He was tall, successful, and clearly devoted to his wife. He kissed Genevieve gently and scooped Theodore from her arms. Sorry I'm late, sweetheart. Traffic was brutal. He looked around at the silent room full of staring guests. I hope I didn't interrupt anything important. Just introducing our children to some old friends, Genevieve said, smiling up at her husband. The contrast between the 2 men was stark. Alexander looked at Genevieve with genuine love and respect. Trevor was staring at them both with dawning horror as his reputation dissolved before his eyes. Genevieve turned back to the crowd. Trevor invited me here today because he wanted you all to see his pathetic ex-wife. He wanted you to witness the broken, childless woman he'd escaped from and understand why he'd been justified in leaving me. She looked directly at Trevor. But what Trevor didn't account for was that destroying my marriage didn't destroy me. It forced me to discover who I really was, underneath all the lies he'd made me believe about myself. Patricia Morrison approached Genevieve, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I believed everything Trevor told us. I thought you were the one who'd given up on the marriage. Trevor's very good at rewriting history, Genevieve said gently. But DNA doesn't lie. Medical records don't lie. And these 4 children are proof that every word Trevor said about my infertility was false. Nathan Morrison looked at his brother with disgust. You let her blame herself for 3 years? You sabotaged your own marriage and then made everyone believe she was the problem? I didn't. You don't understand how obsessive she became, Trevor tried. No. Victoria appeared in the doorway, having just arrived. She was holding a folder. What we understand is that you're a psychological abuser who systematically destroyed your wife's self-worth, then rewrote history to make yourself the victim. Victoria walked over and handed Genevieve the folder. These are the text messages Trevor sent Genevieve during their separation, the ones where he tried to convince her she was remembering their marriage incorrectly. The ones where he called her unstable for being hurt by his betrayal, the ones where he tried to gaslight her into believing she was mentally ill. Genevieve opened the folder, pulling out printed text exchanges. Should I read some of these aloud? Or should we skip to the part where Trevor planned this baby shower specifically to humiliate me? Trevor's face had gone from white to red. You were spying on me? I was sitting in my car across from Nathan's house when you and Candace were on the deck discussing your plan. You said, and I quote, having Genevieve show up looking pathetic will answer all those questions without me saying a word. You told Candace I was too desperate not to come, and that when I had my inevitable breakdown at your baby shower, it would justify everything you'd told them about why the marriage failed. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Candace was staring at Trevor like she'd never seen him before. You planned this? You invited your ex-wife here to humiliate her publicly? She's taking everything out of context, Trevor insisted. Genevieve's always been dramatic. Stop, Candace said quietly. Just stop lying. She turned to Genevieve. He told me you were obsessive about having children, that you'd had a breakdown when treatments didn't work, that you'd blamed him and become abusive. He said inviting you was an olive branch, a way to show there were no hard feelings. There are hard feelings, Genevieve said, but not the kind Trevor expected. I'm not here because I'm bitter about him finding happiness. I'm here because he invited me specifically to destroy what was left of my reputation, and I decided to destroy his instead. The baby shower dissolved into chaos after that. Patricia Morrison demanded Trevor explain himself. Nathan confronted his brother about the lies he'd told the family. Trevor's co-workers from the firm were looking at him with new understanding. If he'd been capable of this level of manipulation with his wife, what else might he be lying about? But Genevieve wasn't interested in watching Trevor's meltdown. She'd said what she came to say. She'd exposed his lies, revealed his cruelty, and shown everyone exactly who he really was. As she loaded her children back into their car seats, Trevor appeared beside her car, his face desperate. Genevieve, please, you've destroyed my reputation, my relationship with my family. Can't we just what, Trevor? Pretend you didn't spend 3 years psychologically torturing me? Pretend you didn't sabotage my fertility while making me believe I was broken? Pretend you didn't plan to use my pain as entertainment for your friends? I made mistakes, but you didn't have to. Didn't have to what? Tell the truth? Defend myself against the lies you've been spreading for 2 years? Show everyone who I really became after you threw me away? She clicked the last car seat into place and turned to face him. You thought destroying my marriage would leave me broken forever. You thought taking away my home, my financial security, and my sense of worth would make me disappear into nothing. You thought inviting me to your baby shower would give you one final opportunity to prove you'd been right to leave me. Trevor was crying now, but Genevieve felt nothing but cold satisfaction. But you were wrong about everything, Trevor. Wrong about my fertility. Wrong about my strength. Wrong about my ability to rebuild my life without you. And most importantly, Wrong about thinking you'd get away with it all. She climbed into her car as Alexander started the engine. Wait, Trevor called out. What happens now? Genevieve looked at him through the open window. Now? Now you get to live with the consequences of your own cruelty. Your family knows what you did. Candace knows what you're capable of. Your reputation is in ruins. And I get to drive home to my beautiful life with my 4 children and my husband, who actually values me. As they pulled away from the country club, Genevieve could see Trevor standing alone in the parking lot, watching his carefully constructed world fall apart. If this story proved that karma doesn't just catch up, it shows up with receipts, smash that like button. Subscribe to the Formidable Revenge channel for more stories of cosmic justice delivered with style. And comment below, what would you have done in Genevieve's situation? Alexander reached over and squeezed her hand. How do you feel? I feel free, Genevieve said honestly. For 3 years, Trevor made me believe his opinion of me mattered. He convinced me that my worth was tied to whether I could give him children, whether I could keep him satisfied, whether I could be whatever he needed me to be at any given moment. She looked back at her sleeping children. But these 4 perfect babies, this successful company we built, this life we've created together, it all happened because Trevor was too short-sighted to see what I was capable of. He threw away a woman who would have loved him forever. And for what? So he could feel superior for a few years? His loss, Alexander said. Though, I have to admit, I'm grateful he was too stupid to appreciate what he had. Otherwise, I never would have found you. 3 months later, Genevieve heard through mutual acquaintances that Candace had left Trevor. Apparently, once she understood the pattern of his manipulation, she'd started recognizing the same tactics in their own relationship. Trevor's lies about Genevieve had been just the beginning. Trevor's family had distanced themselves after learning the truth. His mother had called Genevieve to apologize, expressing horror at what her son had done. Nathan had reached out to say he was ashamed of how they'd treated her based on Trevor's version of events. But Genevieve didn't need their apologies. She'd already moved on. Her consulting firm continued to grow, helping hundreds of women rebuild their lives after betrayal. She and Alexander expanded their family home to accommodate their growing children and the life they were building together. Sometimes, late at night, when she was feeding a crying baby or juggling work calls while managing toddlers, Genevieve thought about who she'd been when Trevor left her. That broken woman who'd believed she was worthless without a husband, defective without children, destined to live as a cautionary tale. Trevor had tried to write a story where she was the villain, the unstable ex-wife who'd ruined a good marriage through her own inadequacies. But Genevieve had rewritten the ending. In her version, she was the survivor who'd discovered her own strength, the woman who'd refused to accept someone else's narrative about her worth, the mother, wife, and entrepreneur who'd built something extraordinary from the ashes of betrayal. Trevor had wanted to use that baby shower to prove he'd been right to leave her. Instead, he'd given Genevieve the perfect stage to prove something far more important: that his opinion of her worth had always said everything about him and nothing about her. The best revenge, Genevieve had learned, wasn't destruction or cruelty or even exposure. The best revenge was simply living so well that the person who'd tried to destroy you became irrelevant to your happiness. And as she tucked her 4 children into bed that night, kissed her husband goodnight, and looked around at the life she'd built from nothing, Genevieve understood something fundamental. Trevor hadn't ended her story when he filed those divorce papers. He'd just given her permission to write a better one. And this time, she was the only one who got to choose how it ended.